software didn't see it. Anyway, hi, I'm Laura Rogers. This is Joelle Jobson here on audio. Say hello.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome to SharePoint Power Hour. This is our weekly show we do most Wednesdays at 11 Central. And we had fun broadcasting live from Microsoft Ignite a couple of weeks ago. That was awesome. They had such a fancy setup there. I had sent out the email beforehand with a link to it, but then Microsoft had their own get up for broadcasting the show on my channel. So when they broadcast it, it just ended up broadcasting to a new URL as a new live event instead of the little pre-created one that I had done, which is fine. But then the link in your email just simply didn't work. So you all, when you go to the YouTube Wonder Laura channel, you will see it in there. It's just not it's not the original link that I had created. So.
Yeah, and in the beginning was me trying to desperately get Slack to work as well. So you may have noticed that. And that didn't work either when we were on stage.
Yeah. So, but we had so much to talk about. I don't know how much time we would have had to
totally
talk
true.
to everybody. All right. So we had a lot of great announcements at Ignite, and it was a whirlwind, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was actually probably one of the best Microsoft conferences that I've been to for, actually getting a lot of good information and some deep dive into the different tools. So that was really great.
Right. Yeah. So the next few power hours we do are really, there's so much to cover. I mean, Joelle, I was looking at like the new search stuff that came out where there's a new sort of search admin center.
Yep.
Did you get to poke around in there yet?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So some of the stuff, anyway, search, web parts, lists, just everything. There's going to be so much to cover as we go through power hours in the next few weeks.
As these things begin to roll out too. I mean, they'll be rolling out like continuously over the next couple of months, all these updates. So
as if they're not always rolling out continuously.
Yeah.
Anyway.
If you thought it was bad before.
All these exciting things they teased us with.
Yeah.
So this week's topic, Joelle had a great idea. So Joelle, this was your idea. I'll let you go ahead and sort of give the introduction summary, and I'll just sit by and let you kind of explain what it is.
Yeah, sure. I think we just, and I know that we have a lot of people that are experienced with Power Apps and probably Flow as well that watch us regularly. But this is really kind of a video to have out there as a helpful thing for folks that are moving from or having to kind of make that transition from SharePoint Designer workflows to Flow, and just really, of course, my phone's going to start ringing as soon as I start talking. But and just really are trying to understand like how to translate things from SharePoint Designer to Flow. So we wanted to kind of go through some of the common terms we see in SharePoint Designer and some of the common concepts, and then just look at how those things are done with Flow, and then also just look at how Flow builds upon them, and of course any just gotchas, things that you had in SharePoint Designer that were regularly used that may not be as clear or even exist in Flow yet. So that's kind of just a little bit about what we wanted to do.
All right, yeah. So I will go ahead and share. I went ahead and shared my desktop with you, Joelle, in Skype, so you can see like the live version of it. And I'll go ahead and share my desktop here in. All right, here we are. Okay, so here is a nice little table that Joelle put together that we'll go through all these in this hour, and it basically explains how to translate all these concepts in SharePoint Designer to Flow. And also, if I did a session just real quick at Ignite about the new approvals, the new out-of-the-box approvals in SharePoint. And if you go, all those sessions are free, just on demand to anyone. So if you go to the Microsoft Ignite website and look for my session, I was like BRK 1100. I don't know off the top of my head what it was, but if you can go watch that session, it's a whole hour about a lot of some of these concepts and a lot of common things people do with approvals and kind of the new concepts in out of the box approvals. So go check that out too. I need to write a blog post and post all those too. All right. So here are some concepts that we'll talk through, and then and we'll, I'll demonstrate them just kind of on the fly like I always do, and then we'll go through. We have some more slides, but this is this is a really great one that really explains the actual, different things that are different versus things that are the same in the workflows. So for the first concept, really, I'm going to start with triggers and trigger outputs. So I'll go ahead and actually flip over to so you got my Microsoft Flow here. So we'll talk about triggers, and I'll go ahead and just create a new blank flow. And then as we demo things, I can go into, some of these little demo flows that I have. But I like to create a new blank one just from scratch. And then, so the first thing you're going to do is you have to pick a trigger. Now, back in SharePoint Designer, you had little checkboxes. So I actually probably should open up SharePoint Designer too. You had little checkboxes, and you had checkboxes that basically said whether you want it to run when an item in the SharePoint list is created, if the item's modified, or manually, or all three. And you can just check as many of those boxes as you wanted to. Well, this trigger here is the same concept, except we have a lot more options. We have not only, something happening in SharePoint, we have just, manual triggers. We have a bajillion additional things that we didn't have from, the SharePoint Designer ones. So like here's SharePoint Designer, and I can go create a new, just pretend like I'm going to create a new workflow, and then test. I'll just show you what I'm referring to here. It's kind of funny because I don't crack SharePoint Designer open hardly anymore. So these start options right here, these little checkboxes, those are what I'm referring to as far as this trigger. So that's the exact same concept. Now look at all the triggers we can have, and a few of these are new. They announce them at Ignite. So like when a site has requested to join a hub site, that's brand new. That's that hub site concept that we talked about in a previous Power Hour. But again, you can see deleted is something we never had in SharePoint that people wanted frequently for something to be triggered when an item got deleted, but now that's something we do have in Flow. So this is just the SharePoint triggers. I mean, you have a plethora of all these hundreds of other services that you can use as a trigger. You can say when something arrives in a mailbox, you can do a manual trigger, somebody tweets something, etc. So that's the concept of triggers. And let's see, I'll go ahead. Oh, thanks for Amanda for posting that, the link to my session in the chat window there. So that's the concept of triggers. So then we have the next item here is actions, and actions are pretty much the same thing, except again, we have hundreds and hundreds more actions that we can do. So I'll go ahead and just show you. I'll pick the manual. I'll pick this manual trigger first, and we'll talk about these manual inputs, and then I'll show you the SharePoint actions and some of the more common actions real quick. I know we've done a lot of Power Hours about Flow, but this is a little bit more introductory and geared to people, like Joelle said, geared to people that are still stuck in SharePoint Designer, and maybe you just kind of wanted to get familiar with Flow and learn the concepts. So the input, this is going to be the same thing as the initiation form that you had in SharePoint Designer workflows. So that means when someone clicks a button to manually trigger a flow, do you want to ask them a question or have them fill something in? Like, for example, do I want them to have to put in the name of an approver before they start the workflow, to maybe say, I want the document to go to this approver for approval, and they would fill in the approver. So that's just an example of a common thing that you could have as a trigger. And so I could just type like test approver there, and that would tell them to please enter an approver. You can customize that. And then, okay, so let's go look at actions. And as we're adding actions, you can start by just clicking a category, but you can also just do search through them. So if you know the name of it, you can just quickly type it here. But look at all the SharePoint actions we have. Now, these are a lot different than the actions that we had in SharePoint Designer. So in SharePoint Designer, we had these. Now, of course, I don't have the bandwidth in this class to translate every single action to what it is in Flow. That should probably be a separate, like a blog post or something like that. But a lot of them are completely different. So you do have, you had variables, and we had creating list items, editing list items, and deleting items, things like that. We also had some more advanced ones with things like substrings and a little bit of calculations and math and adding dates and things like that. So the SharePoint Designer items that had to do with SharePoint list items and library items, those are, if it's a list, it's going to be referred to as an item in here, and if it's a library, it's going to be a file. So that's one of the big differences that you do in Flow as opposed to SharePoint Designer. And then we have things like get items. Let's see, I'll type get here to narrow it down. Get items is awesome, and we didn't really have this concept in SharePoint Designer except when we got very advanced and did some of that stuff that I did in a Power Hour probably a year or two ago about using web services and going in and like actually getting a whole list of items and like parsing through it in the dictionary and all that stuff, which was really complicated. So this get items is a lot more simple way to get a list of items filtered by some particular criteria. So, and we can get attachments. We can do a lot of things that we couldn't do in SharePoint Designer. All right, so actions, and again, we not only have SharePoint actions, but we have all these other services of actions we can do, hundreds of actions. All right, so let's go to the next. That's a concept that, I could spend an hour just kind of talking about actions. But the idea here is I'm going to go through this list and try and kind of go through these concepts and make sure we cover all of them. And we're actually writing a Flow class right now, a course. Right now we have a Power Apps course, and we do a little with some of these connectors in the Power Apps course, but we don't have an actual Flow class. So we're working on one of those right now. So this is some of the content from that. All right, so stages and steps in SharePoint Designer. We have a concept of scopes in Flow. So let's go look at scopes. Well, we'll look at stages. So with stages, you could actually go to, in SharePoint Designer, you could actually set it to jump straight to some other stage in here. So I could actually make it have a condition if I wanted to and jump to another stage in the workflow in SharePoint Designer. And here we have scopes, so let me close this. I'm gonna, let's see, new step. I'll just do a built-in. Oh, we also have, of course, variables are called something different, like variables. We have initialize variable is one of them. I'll just give it a name. You have to initialize a variable in Flow before you can use it, so it actually has to exist and has to have a name, which is different than in SharePoint Designer, where you could, as soon as you started using a variable, it actually put it in this list of variables, but you could add them here. So adding a variable and setting what type it is in SharePoint Designer is just like initializing a variable and saying what type it is, like this. And then, let's see, I want to do an action. I want to do a, save it. Oh, I didn't give it a name either. And then in SharePoint Designer, just kind of getting around in here, you could put your little orange cursor somewhere in between to add things. And over here in Flow, you can put your cursor in between and add things that way. So one thing I can do is, I'm not going to add a parallel branch right now, but I'm going to add it's just wanting me to do an action. I want to do oh, look. This is new. Look at this, Joelle. They moved it. They moved condition. So now when I go to choose an action, every single thing that, instead of it having new, action or condition or whatever all listed together, the condition is actually listed there with all the actions. See, aren't you glad we haven't completely written that class yet? Because we'd be changing a whole bunch. And this was not like this literally last week. That's new. Don't you love it when we discover new things during Power Hour? All right. So this is, okay, so I initialize a variable, then I've got a condition, and then I can do a scope. Let me just do it. Let me do a scope. I'll just type it, because apparently scopes are listed now along with everything else where they weren't before. Scope control, there we go. All right, and then I can put an action inside of here, and then I can, scope is just like lumping everything together, and the whole scope can be named, and it can be and have a run after. So after, you're basically saying what scope should run after. So I could have two entire different branches of the flow, like grouped together in these scopes. What you really want to rename these, just in general, when you're going through Flow, try and rename things as you go, because as soon as I start using something, like if I initialize it, I have this thing is called initialize variable. Notice that I can rename it if I want to. But as soon as I start using that variable somewhere below in the flow, oh, now I can rename it. Maybe that's new too. You couldn't rename it before if you're already using it. That's funny. Okay, so scope is just, it's a good way of grouping things together so that you can collapse the whole thing. And a condition you're going to be able to group you're going to be able to collapse the whole condition too. So
yeah, scopes are really good when you're having, like, you have like a huge, like, complicated flow where you might want to, document it and have like specific areas to be able to, somebody can come and find exactly where to fix something.
Yeah. And it's a good way to just be able to document and name things. Yeah, scopes are instead of stages. Now, let me see. Run after, and then this concept of run after. We don't even have the concept of run after in SharePoint Designer, so maybe I'll cover that last. But so scopes are just, we're categorizing things. I don't see anything obvious that tells me like to jump to another scope like you can with stages.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't notice that either.
Yeah.
If anybody knows, let us know if there's a way to do that.
Yeah. Okay. See, Flow is one of those things I was telling Joelle, like I feel like every time I sit down to start teaching Flow, there are new things or things I haven't quite used as much and things that I still have to learn and figure out and test myself, and it's like constant. Just a little tidbit there. Mary says, is it better to have one big flow or several? Well, it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're doing a bunch of different things on just a certain list item, I like to have, if you have to do something, I would like to just do one flow and have one flow running, like when a list item's updated, for example. And then within that one flow, you can say something, you can do conditions inside of it. And that way, because flows actually count, they count up. So you're going to get a certain number of flows you can do per month. So that's one reason to not do a whole bunch of flows when you really could just do, make it, a little bit more consolidated, right? So the next concept here is going to be loops, and loops are cool because in here in Flow, it actually knows when it needs to put a loop in something. So for example, I can say, if I'm going to go get the attachments of some list item, or if I'm going to go get attachments of an email, or I'm going to look at all the people who approve something. If it sees multiple of whatever that is, it automatically puts a loop. So in SharePoint Designer, the way you did a loop was you say, loop a certain number of times, or you just tell it how many times you want it to run, or you say to loop as long as this equals this, you just keep looping through something. So it looks a lot different, doesn't it? It looks a lot different. So in here, you could actually do I think it's each loop. I never actually insert them myself. I usually they create themselves in here. So I'll show you what I'm referring to. I'll go back to a workflow that I was doing yesterday. I'm going to save that. And that Joelle and I were talking through, and I'll show you what it is and how it. Remember, it was kind of annoying, Joelle, when it kept putting in a loop and I didn't want it to.
Yeah.
So this is my. Okay, so in Office 365 groups, I'll come with a group calendar, and that is not a SharePoint list. That's not. It is. There is a SharePoint site behind the scenes in an Office 365 group, but that group calendar is not a SharePoint list in that Office 365 group's SharePoint site. So it is actually a different action. There are Office 365 group actions that you can do in here. So what I was doing was I wanted to basically start an approval to fill out a form, just say basically like name of event. Now this could be a SharePoint list item or anything else, but this one's pretty simple. I'm just going to say the name of an event I want to have in a calendar, and then start an approval, and then create a group event after that event gets approved. So I'm going to delete all this and show you what I'm talking about when it puts the loop in there for me. So I'm going to say as soon as someone manually triggers this and types the name of their event that they want to get approved. Of course, you'd have a date and stuff like that too. I'm just trying to keep this pretty simple. There isn't even a date control in here yet. Then I'm going to say anyone or everyone from the assigned list. I'll just say anyone. And then it's just assigned to me, just my test account. Approve this, and I'll put the name of the event that they typed in there. And then the requester can be the name of the person, the user email, the person that actually fills in the trigger and does the trigger. And then the details, item link. I don't have an item link because there's no actual item for them to approve. It's just basically, do you approve this name of the event? That's all there is to it. And then after it gets approved, then I wanted to say, well, I want it to go create a calendar event. So that is going to be in the Office 365 groups category here. So that is create a group event. Did you all know this, that the group events in the calendar in the Office 365 group are different than creating a SharePoint list item? Pretty cool, huh? So I need to say which group that I want to create the calendar item in. The name of event, I can just make it be the name of whatever they typed whenever they type the name of their event. And then I'm just going to make up a couple of times in here, like the request date and then the response date. Of course, you'd have to, you could do something more fancy to do something with dates. And then I can put a whole bunch more information about that event that I'm creating. But notice that it automatically put apply to each. That wasn't there, right? I didn't insert this. So why is it saying apply to each? So it's automatically going to give you an apply to each anytime it sees that it's got to iterate through multiple things. So for each response, it's going to do this. So it sees that technically I could have multiple responses. I originally had this as everyone from the assigned list, and I changed it to, I didn't want to have a loop, and I changed it to anyone from the assigned list, and it still put the loop on here. So basically, this case, I've only got one approver anyway, but it still put this loop on here. So I'm not going to go delve into anything too nitty gritty, but yeah, that's what a loop looks like. So anything that you're going to do in your, that you want it to do for each response, you're going to add inside of this loop. All right. And like I said, if you have an email that's got attachments and you want to do something with the attachments, move them to SharePoint or whatever you do, it's going to know that an email could have multiple attachments, and it's going to automatically put a loop. Or you could just manually insert a loop. All right. We're already almost halfway done. We got several slides actually. Parallel branches. There's actually some. There are parallel branches, and then there's a, what was the other one that's similar to a parallel branch? It was. I'll go in there and look at it. It's such a different concept. Okay, so in SharePoint Designer, you could do a parallel block, and whatever actions you put in here, create list item, whatever it is, set field, it'll do those simultaneously. So that's what a parallel block looks like in SharePoint Designer. And then a parallel block in here in Flow looks like, we'll type parallel. I can't believe they had the nerve to change up Flow and the way you add all these right before I'm demoing it.
The nerve.
We were demoing Microsoft Teams to a customer yesterday, and Teams was all acting up and wonky and all kinds of issues. During the demo, of course, they're like, is it always going to do this? Like,
yeah.
No.
It's not a good look.
Not usually. Okay, so if I go up here, see, I can add a parallel branch. It just doesn't let me add a parallel branch below that. That seems like a bug to me. But I guess you actually have to already have something in there, so then you can give it a parallel branch for it to do things at the same time. Now, a cool thing about a parallel branch is that you can actually do different things according to whether something is successful. So, for example, if I do something like, let's see, can I add? No, I can't add one. I'm just going to try and add one right in there, but the little arrow thingy went away. Here, cancel. There. There we go. So, like if I do, like, get manager. And I'm going to get manager of the person that's approving it, the person that manually triggered it. So I'm going to go get their manager. Well, sometimes in Active Directory, you might not have a manager. So you don't want the whole workflow to just bomb out. So I can do a parallel branch, and I can say, I can do this configure run after. So this branch I want to run after get manager has succeeded, is successful, and then this other branch, whatever I want to do here, like I don't know, do a notification. I want to do that. Configure run after get manager has failed. So that's your way. See, it even puts a little red icon up there. So if get manager is successful, it goes on this side of the parallel branch, and otherwise it goes here. Now, you don't have to do two successful and failed for your parallel branches, you can just have it do two branches at the exact same time no matter what. But that's a nice little trick of being able to do some some error checking and error handling in your workflow. Let's see. I'm trying to read what Stuart said. Our communications team often changes the emails, so it's set up in emails as separate workflows that trigger the main flow triggers. That way anyone in the process will get the most recent version of emails. Interesting. Joelle, does Planner have events? Nicholas is saying is the same as a Planner event. I've never seen events in Planner. Is that a new thing?
I mean, I know you can date them, and that they have kind of like a calendar view, I think, in there,
like the to-dos and stuff. The tasks.
Yeah. But I think it's still just a task.
Yeah, it's
Planner.
Not really an event, Nicholas. So it's not really. Yeah, it's really like a bunch of
Yeah, dating, putting something on a calendar.
That's so funny. Thank you. Mary, I'm glad you liked that little tip. Okay, so that's parallel branches, and then we had let me see, and then I'll just call this no manager. You have no manager. And then what was that action? It was like terminate or something, Joelle?
Yeah, stopping the workflow.
And that was one of the ones that we're going to cover. I wish this wasn't so slow. Come on. Oh, good Lord. There we go. So I can just, terminate. You don't have to terminate. I mean, it'll end after it goes down this branch and there's nothing after it. But you can actually, give it a certain status and a code so that you can log that stuff and be able to report on it or see it later. Like when you're looking at all of your flows and the bigger picture of flows and how they're doing. All right, let's do. I wish that other little drop-down box was still there. What was it? It was not due until scope. Oh, switch. Switch is what? Okay, so switch is an interesting one. So let me go to this other workflow and explain to you why you would use a switch versus just an if condition. And that is going to be over here. Because when I was doing my presentations at Ignite, I just put each of those presentations as a PDF and put it in SharePoint and then created a flow. And I said people could send me an email and it would look at the subject, and then if the subject contained like the name of BRK, whatever my session was, it would just respond with the PDF of the slides. So I actually created a shared mailbox, laura.rogers@iwmentor.com, so that Joelle and Chris could work on this and manage it with me and manage all the incoming emails. But so instead of being able, so a switch is going to be, I'll just show you what a switch looks like. A switch is kind of like an if statement, and we actually have that concept in Power Apps too. Switch. Switch is if basically, like I'll say the subject equals BRK1110. I think that's what it was. If the subject equals BRK1110, do this, and you put all the actions that you want to happen if the subject equals BRK1110. Otherwise, you can say add an action if it doesn't equal it, and you can actually add more switches. So if it equals BRK, shoot, I don't remember off the top of my head what the other one was. Let me see. It was BRK1110 and then BRK2282. So I know this is a little confusing, 2282. But so I could say if the subject equals this, send them this file. Otherwise, if the subject equals this, send them this file. Otherwise, just if it doesn't equal either of those things, do this. Well, I didn't want to do equals. So with a switch, you have to do equals. You can't do contains. So I wanted people to be able to type just that name of the session just somewhere in the subject. And I didn't want the subject to have to be equal to that. So I did not use a switch. So I made it a little bit more complicated. It's probably, Nicholas, I've never used the switch command in PowerShell, but it's probably the same concept. And you can do this. There is a switch command in Power Apps too. So that's, I'm going to delete that. So instead of doing switch, we made it a little more convoluted. And if, see, I'll collapse these. If basically it's taking the subject of the email and it's making it to upper, which is making it uppercase, so that it just takes whatever you wrote as your subject and turns it into uppercase. If it contains BRK1110, then I'm going to go get this SharePoint file, this PDF file, and then I'm going to send it from a shared mailbox, this laura.rogers@iwmentor.com, blah, 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 blah. Thank you for attending my session. And it's got the actual file is attached to it. Isn't that cool? And then if not, then I have to say, if it contains, I did like another condition. So it had to be more complicated because I wanted to say, if it contains this, do this. If not, then another condition, if it contains this other thing. So yeah, it was a little more of a pain because I needed to have contains, but that's the difference between using a switch and an if statement. The switch is very simple. If just one field equals this, equals this, equals this. And you have multiple branches for different things that it can equal. All right, so, all right. Pretty interesting, huh? Okay. That was parallel blocks and switches. Start options, initiation forms we already talked about. And then end of workflow, we have the terminate control, which we talked about. SharePoint workflows will just end. You don't have to tell it to end. It's going to be over no matter what, but you could force it to end by using it was a stop command in SharePoint 2010 workflows. And I literally just had to do one of these yesterday for a customer in an old 2010 workflow. Yes, Lisa, there is a switch command in Power Apps. And then there is a terminate control that will terminate whatever you're doing in the workflow. All right, so here's some things that I'll talk about, things that exist in Flow that we didn't have in SharePoint Designer, and a few of those we've kind of gone over already, but I'll go ahead and just kind of keep that on this other screen and go back into this little other flow that I was doing. Okay, let me go out of there. I don't want to save any changes I made. All right, so of course we have a modern UI, and we have hundreds of templates and hundreds, I think it's at least 200 different connectors. And just this concept of connectors that didn't exist before in SharePoint Designer. You only had pretty much SharePoint as your data source, and if you wanted to have other types of data sources, it was way more complicated. You had to do web services and stuff like that. In here we have audit logging. In SharePoint Designer, the only way to do logging was to actually, you could use the out-of-the-box workflows, which the task process designer stuff had some logging built in. But if you're creating your own workflow, you actually had to do this, whatever. You had to do this log to history list action for you to know anything that happened in the workflow. Well, in here in Flow, we actually have, it's just built in. It will just automatically tell you, what's going on. Like this test that we ran yesterday to create a new calendar item. So I manually triggered the flow. I have all the details. I started an approval. It tells me, it's kind of raw data, but it tells me who the approval went to and all the details about it. And you can just click and drill down into any of these. And then it tells me what event it created. And so, and you'll just have this list of things that ran successfully, and if they didn't run successfully, it will actually let you can go adjust the workflow and hit resubmit, which is huge because, oh my gosh, who didn't spend hours of their life in SharePoint Designer workflows, like creating or editing SharePoint items over and over and over and over again, or manually triggering them over and over again just to rerun a workflow. I mean, I love this resubmit thing. That's huge. Because you just go adjust the workflow, change it, and then just go back to one that failed and hit resubmit. Let's see, another centralized approvals and lazy approvals. We have that approval action. And again, if you want to know all about approvals, that session I did at Ignite has a bunch about that. But we had this approval action. And in SharePoint Designer, you had some task actions and this sort of little task process designer where you could send things to people for approval. But it would just put it in the task list in that SharePoint site, and it was just confined to that one site. Well, these approvals in Flow are all the approvals you've received in your entire tenant, like ever. Well, they do timeout. So the old tasks in SharePoint Designer in 2010 and 2013, they would only live in there for a certain amount of time. It's like 90 days or so. And, admins had ways they could go in on the server and tweak that if they wanted to. But basically, this is a concept that you didn't have in SharePoint Designer, because it's just one big central list of things that you can approve and approvals that you've done, these are the ones that I've actually sent to people. Come on, so slow. And these are the ones that I've actually, I'm waiting for responses on these. And then this is the whole history of things that I've sent and received for all my approvals. Amanda says, could you export the Flow logs to a SharePoint list? The logs, that's a good question. Let me go look at those. I think so. You can import an entire flow, and you can export an entire flow, but let's see, what about the logs? Let's go look at those. Off the top of my head, I think so. Oh yeah, here we go. Get CSV file. So I can get the CSV file of this, but you can also, there's some new reporting around it and new admin stuff around all these flows. And that's some of the stuff that they talked about at Ignite, was this ability to do more admin and be able to see more globally about all of your flows. And also, last Power Hour, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about all the auditing and audit history, and we talked about in Office 365 admin, where you could go do an audit log search, and flows were actually in there too. I didn't see Power Apps, but flows were in there in the main audit log search for the whole tenant. So this is where I can go in and go to resources. It's kind of buried in there, but I have all my apps and I have all my flows, and this is the flow admin. So Amanda, I don't know if this helps you, but you could go look at every single flow in your whole organization and be able to see who owns it and go drill in and see what's going on with it. So, but yeah, you can go to the log history list and export it, but you could also do more reporting off of it. Lori says, where is Microsoft with at end of life for SharePoint Designer? I don't know. Yes, Flow is the official replace. Yes, you should be moving to Flow. Yeah, with Power Apps, they're kind of like, well, it's not really an official replacement for InfoPath, but InfoPath's going away, so kind of Power Apps is the new way to do it. And so, I mean, Flow is kind of the same thing. There is no way to like migrate your SharePoint Designer workflows to Flow. You're just creating them new. But yes, from now on, I think Flow is to the point where it is viable and it is something where you can do all the things that you were familiar with doing in SharePoint Designer. It's just a lot different. A year or two ago, I wouldn't have said that because there were still a good bit of things missing, but they've filled in a lot of the gaps lately. Let's see, some other new concepts to learn on the connectors. So we'll go back to our list of connections. And you see, I pretty much went through here and just created a ton, just using a lot of different, just to try a bunch of them out, created a bunch of these. Flow management, that's one of the connectors. So that's where you can manage, as an admin, manage other flows. And so that's an actual connector. You have forms, again, hundreds of different connectors, and I can go do a new one, and I can see just tons and tons and tons of them. So this concept definitely didn't exist in SharePoint Designer. All right, and then new concepts. So we talked about apply to each, and that's the looping and switch. And as far as dynamic content and expressions, with SharePoint Designer, you can use this little string builder, and you can have dynamic content where you can put text together with fields from your item or variables and things like that. And then you could also do some things like these string things where you can go extract, get 2 characters from the beginning of a string of some field. And those were, not that advanced. And then, because there are only a few of them, I can calculate like current item ID plus 1 or something. Do some math, a little bit of math. So it was pretty limited. So as far as expressions and flow, I mean, there is a ton that you can do. It's a little overwhelming, actually. So let's go back into this test flow that I was doing. Nicholas says, should you have multiple environments or just one? Well, environments, Nicholas, first of all, you have to have a certain license level to even have multiple environments. Environments are going to be if you want to segregate out like different groups of people that are and managing different groups of people, like maybe different like major divisions of your company and things like that are creating flow, and get more granular about how you manage who can create flows and what connectors they can use and stuff like that. So that's what you can do with different multiple environments. We've only got 13 minutes left. I might have time to kind of show you a glimpse of that, but I'm not sure. Okay, so this is just this test flow that I was creating. So let's go look at some of the, actually, I'll go look at the one, the 2 upper, the one that we had in that other flow. Here we go. Okay, so this. All right, to get to this little expression builder, you can just click your cursor in any box, just some empty box. And then any of these empty boxes that you click in, you're going to have this expression little tab over here. So this is where I can see all these different categories of functions that I can use, just tons of them. And then don't forget that you can click See More to be able to see like the full list of that category. Or you can just start typing something like to upper, like to lower, to upper. So a lot of these concepts, if you've used Excel in the past, if you use Microsoft Access, just any other types of logic or languages, a lot of these concepts are going to be familiar to you. And so if I want to say like, is there an addition, or if there's a subtraction or whatever it is, I can just start typing, and then that will kind of narrow it down for me, because there's no way I'm going to know what this full list of expressions is. So I can either just go skim through and read every single thing, or I can say, well, if I wanted to do such and such in Excel, it would have been called this, and just go search for it. So you go in here and you can build expressions this way. So like the way we did this one was this to upper. So I clicked on one he already, my husband Chris created this. He already created, And I'll show you what it looks like to rebuild it. So I'll just get rid of this to upper. And so I have to start in a blank box and go to expression and I know that it's called to upper. And then it's just like in Excel and Power Apps, it's going to tell me what it expects in the parentheses. And it's going to have, sometimes it'll require multiple parameters, like with commas in between them. So I can say, what do I want to go to uppercase? I need to say what field I need to be translated to uppercase. So then to get the content, I flip over to this dynamic content tab, and that's when I can go get the subject. And I just click on the subject and it puts it right here in the expression. I click OK. So that's how you can build those expressions, and there are a bajillion of them, and so that's very different than the way that you did it in SharePoint Designer. SharePoint Designer was a lot more obvious and a lot more limited, but in this one there's a lot more freedom as to what you can do, but it's it can be a little bit more complex. So that is how you can work with expressions in Flow. And let's see, does anybody have any other fun examples of things you did with expressions in Flow? Let's see. Patty C says, what type of email account is best used to send from? I tried using my generic from email address. Well, you could do a shared mailbox. So you can go into your Office 365 admin and create a shared mailbox, and then whoever you add, whatever members you add to that shared mailbox, will have the ability to send as, and that way they'll be able to manage the workflow. And then if you create, like you said, you have a generic from email address, but you actually have to go to that account in Exchange in Office 365 admin and put yourself in there to be able to have send as rights. So yeah, you have to know to do that. Let me see if I can go find that. No, I'm in the wrong environment. Hold on. Okay, since a few of you are asking about this, I'll just show you what I'm talking about. So if you have, I recommend just using a shared mailbox. And I'm going to expand this out so I can go to groups here and go to shared mailboxes. So like I have this shared mailbox called IT department. And then I have to put members here. So Joelle and I are members of the IT department. So I can go say I also want to add Billy Bob and Chris. So when I add them, then they will be able, all these people that I'm putting in as members will be able to do send as in that mailbox. It's got to synchronize this information over to Exchange. Over in Exchange, I used to be an Exchange admin. So over in Exchange, I'll show you that. It is actually going to do that for me and put those in Exchange for me. But if you want to go straight to Exchange to do it, you can. You can go to mailboxes, shared, and it's in here. But you could also go to people's mailboxes like Anne here. And I can do, let's see, send on behalf and send as. So this screen, Mailbox Delegation, is where you would do that for an individual. But for a workflow that you're collaborating on with other people, like that one that I was just showing you from Ignite, that's one that using a shared mailbox is best, and that way everybody can go into the shared mailbox, everybody can, make the flow, send as the shared mailbox. Now, one thing that kind of tripped me up was that when I first created it, I went in there and I hid it from the directory. I set the setting, let's see, show in global address list. I changed this to no, and when I changed it to no, then we couldn't, it wouldn't work for anyone anymore. We couldn't see it in Outlook, and we couldn't do the flow that used it or anything. So I really did want to hide it from the global address list, but turning this to no broke what we were trying to do. So Melissa says you can use Exchange on-prem with Flow. You would have to be, there's an SMTP connector. So there are several different types of mail connectors that you can use in Flow. So you just can't use the one called Office 365 or Office 365 Outlook. But like if I go search, yeah, see there's an SMTP one. There's several other type of mail connectors. Or you could, I think it just depends on your exact setup and whether you're synchronizing your directory to Office 365 or what your setup is there. So let me see if I can get through the rest of what I was doing here. Let's see, dynamic content and expressions, and then some concepts in SharePoint Designer that are very different or that don't exist in Flow. You had site workflows in SharePoint Designer. So you don't need the concept of a site workflow in Flow because everything, site workflows were just, it didn't trigger off of a specific list or library. So flows are, you can have a flow that has nothing to do with SharePoint in here. So you could be not using SharePoint at all. You could have a flow that's triggered when a certain thing gets tweeted and it sends an email to somebody. So so kind of that concept that existed as site workflows doesn't exist. It's not needed when in Flow. And then we can do things like you can't do anything with document sets, at least not. 'Cause document sets have been kind of haven't been updated or anything done with them recently, but you can create folders in Flow and you can move things around between folders. So you just can't do the exact document set items that you had in SharePoint Designer. And those didn't even exist in SharePoint Designer 2013 workflows. Those were only in 2010 ones anyway. So like document sets, document sets were not in 2013. They haven't been around since 2010 workflows had some document set actions. So let's see. Now with approvals, you actually had this whole approval, like, let's see, I'll go to the task. Start a task process. You had this task process designer in SharePoint Designer, and you could customize what the outcomes were. Well, the kind of, again, watch my Ignite session about all this stuff, but kind of the equivalent in Flow is going to be that approval action. And the approval action, as of now, doesn't give you the ability to change what the outcomes can be, like something other than approved or rejected. But you can use an action called Outlook. It's send email with options. So, send email with options lets you actually type what you want some options to be, and then they actually have buttons in the email where they can pick from things. It's just not going to be an approval, and it's not going to show in that list of approvals up here. But you can make the workflow do something according to what their response was when they pick one of those options in the email. So you can have, like, maybe even use the switch and say, if user option was this, go down this path, if this, go down this path, etc. So you can have, not only can you have something other than approve or reject, you can have a bunch of them. You don't even have to just have two. I'm going to wrap it up. Let's see. We don't have impersonation steps in Flow. I tweeted something. Joelle, do you remember me tweeting something the other day about doing permissions with Flow? I didn't write it. I just retweeted it from somebody.
I'll see if I can find it.
Oh, okay. There was a post somewhere of someone saying how to do something with SharePoint permissions in Flow. I just have not personally done it. But we don't have, back in SharePoint 2010 workflows, we had impersonation steps where you could actually do things with permissions in those. We don't have that exact concept in Flow. And then Visio integration that got introduced in SharePoint Designer is actually coming in Flow. It's something that they announced that's going to be exist in here where you can create the flows from within Visio. Whew. All right, let me go back to my screen. Wow, that was a whirlwind, huh? Okay, so let me see. Oh, Jerry said Plum Sale has an add-on that lets you do permissions. There's also a great add-on that I like called the Muhimbi add-on for PDFs is really great. You can get a Muhimbi account. It's a third-party product, but you can actually get a free account like for test and dev that just allows you a certain limited number of runs. And you can also get a free account that just limits you down to certain things. So there are a couple of different ways you can get free or demo accounts with Muhimbi, but it lets you convert things to PDF. So like this is a flow that I did where you have a new customer. So a new email arrives, it's going to be a new customer. It creates a statement of work, updates some metadata. It actually gets a Word document that it created and converts the Word document to PDF. And it actually, since I use quick parts in the Word document, it converts it to PDF and actually puts the verbiage, like the metadata, and it's in the document and has the customer's name and everything in it. It's pretty cool. So that's one of the things you can do with that one. What was the other one? Plum Sale. Let's go look at Plum Sale. Does anybody use that? Oh, there's Jerry posted a link to it. I'll just type Plum Sale. Plum Sale SP, Plum Sale Forms, Plum Sale Documents. So you put Plum Sale Actions. Let's see what that is. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so that's what he put. That's the link that he put in the chat window anyway. Cool. And what does that cost? I'm not sure. Oh, free trial. Cool. So it's not going to be just a free out of the box, but that is something that you have as an option. And again, hundreds of connectors. Nicholas says he uses Plum Sale with SharePoint Designer, but not with Flow so far. All right. Any other? That's a good idea. Anybody else have any suggestions for third-party products in here that they use? Adobe has some good stuff in here for collecting signatures. You do need to have an Adobe account for that. That's not necessarily going to be just a free add-in, but it does let you do, collect signatures. Pretty neat. All right. Well, I guess I better wrap up. Let me see. Next week, I am going to be out of town. Joelle, I guess you'll just let me know if Joelle may do Power Hour. But yeah. Nicholas, she put a link in. I think maybe it's in the general tab in there to the Ignite sessions. But I'll have to write a blog post that has those in it too. And I wrote a blog post saying that I was going to speak at Ignite, and I put the link to the sessions in that one too. All right. Well, thanks, Joelle, for writing.
Thank you.
Joelle did all the work for this one, actually. Joelle did all the work, and hopefully you guys saw our newsletter. You saw that cute picture of us at Ignite on the fancy desk doing Power Hours. So, and if you didn't sign up for our newsletters, you can go to wonderlaura.com, and it's got a little button that says keep in touch, and that's how you can sign up. So, the third party thing, Nicholas, was called Muhimbi. All right. Thanks, everybody. Over and out.
Have a good one.